IELTS General Writing Task 1, Lesson 4, Semi-formal letters. I've put a red question mark after that semi-formal letters because the main question I'm asking at the start of this lesson is, do we need to learn about this type of letter? Or do semi-formal letters even exist in IELTS General Writing Task 1? Well, let me answer that question straight away. Here's my advice. No. Forget the idea of semi-formal letters. We don't need to think about them at all. Either write a formal letter or an informal letter. We only have to worry about those two types. Semi-formal letters for us don't exist. Let me explain a little bit more why. Well, the idea of semi-formal letters is confusing. For example, if we look at a table of formal and informal, just one feature of formal and informal letters is this. I am, do not, what is. We write the full words in a formal letter, a formal style, but in an informal style you can write I'm, don't, and what's. We call those contracted forms, contractions. So whereas we do the full words in formal letters, we can write those contractions in informal letters. Well, what would you do in a semi-formal letter if this is the case? Is there a kind of middle point between these two things? Well, no, there isn't. So that would be very confusing. What would we do? Well, the answer is we don't have to worry about it because we're not writing anything called a semi-formal letter. We're forgetting about that completely. Now, if we forget about this semi-formal idea, the only question then is, how do we know when to write a formal letter and when to write an informal letter? That's what we need to look at now. Well, here's the answer. Look at three things. These three things will tell you whether you need a formal letter or an informal letter. First, read the instructions below the task. I'll show you an example of that in a moment. Second, look at the person you are writing to. Who are you writing to? That will tell you or give you a good indication of whether you need to write a formal or informal letter. And finally, the third thing is the purpose of the letter. Let's look at these three things in more detail. Step 1, look at the instructions below the task. Take this task for example. You don't need to read it all. We'll quickly look at the instructions below it. So here are the instructions. It says write at least 150 words. You do not need to write any addresses. Begin your letter as follows, dear sir or madam. Now that is the important part. Straight away we know that this should be a formal letter. Dear sir or madam is always formal. Now, what happens though if the instruction doesn't say dear sir or madam, it says begin your letter with dear? This is obviously more confusing because it can be used for formal or informal. So we have to go on to step 2, which was look at who you're writing to. Who are you writing to? Who is the person? Back to that example, the person we're writing to is here, the hotel manager. That should tell you that this needs to be a formal letter. But sometimes it's more confusing. You're not quite sure. Let's have a look at some examples of who are you writing the letter to. Well, if it's a friend or family member, it's always going to be an informal letter. On the other hand, if you're writing to somebody you don't know, a person you do not know, it's going to be a formal letter that you need. However, look at these 4 people, work colleague, boss, neighbour, teacher. It's not so clear. In some situations you might write to a work colleague, boss, neighbour or teacher in a formal way. In other situations you might write to one of these people in an informal way. It depends. So then we have to look at the next thing. Step 3, what's the purpose of the letter? This will help us decide. Now, is it a friendly or social letter? In that case, it's going to be informal. Even if you're writing to your boss in a friendly, social way, it will be an informal letter. On the other hand, if it's a professional or business type letter, you're going to make it formal. So that's the purpose. We know the person and we've seen the instructions, and finally the purpose. That should give us all we need. To make sure this is clear, let's use some examples. I'm going to show you 5 examples of questions, and we will decide using those 3 steps whether we need a formal letter or an informal letter. So question number 1, I'm not giving you the whole question, just the main idea. Write a letter to inform your manager that you are going to leave your job. Begin your letter as follows: Dear Sir or Madam. This is an easy one because this shows us straight away that we need to write a formal letter. Dear Sir or Madam, always formal, and we'll end the letter with yours faithfully. Let's look at number 2 now. It's the same question. Write a letter to inform your manager that you are going to leave your job, but in this case the instruction tells you only to begin with dear. So we have to look at steps 2 and 3, the person and the purpose. So who are we writing to? It's the manager, and the purpose is to leave your job. Hopefully you've already got the answer. This is going to be a formal letter because of the purpose. This is not a friendly letter, it's definitely professional or business. When you write to your manager leaving your job, you're expected to write a formal letter. You begin that letter with Dear Mr. Smith, for example, and you'd end that letter with yours sincerely. When you know the surname of the person, Mr. Smith in this case, you end with yours sincerely and then just put a full name, first name and second name, after that yours sincerely. I'll repeat the beginnings and endings later in a summary. Now question 3, write a letter to invite your manager to your birthday party. Again, the person is the manager, but this time we're inviting the manager to a party, and that is definitely an informal purpose. It's a friendly letter. You're treating your manager as a friend who you're inviting to your party. So you can use your manager's first name. Invent a name. We could say Dear Peter. And the ending is informal, so you can put something like best regards. On to question number 4. Write a letter to your neighbours to thank them for lending you something. Begin your letter as follows: Dear. It's not clear from the instructions from writing dear whether it's formal or informal that we need. So next we look at the person or people, which is neighbours. Still not clear whether we need a formal or informal letter, so the purpose is the most important thing here. Thank them for lending you something. Now I think that should definitely be an informal letter. It's an informal, friendly purpose to this letter. If your neighbours have lent you something, you've borrowed from them, you probably know them well. It wouldn't be a big problem if you wrote a formal thank you letter, but I don't think you would lose marks for it really, but I would prefer to see people write an informal letter for this one. It seems more sensible. In that case then, we can begin with first names for your neighbours, so Dear Peter and Jane, for example, and end with best regards. On to number 5, and this will be a similar one. Write a letter to your neighbours, again, to complain about something they have done. Begin your letter as follows: Dear. So step 1, the instructions. Dear, that's not clear really whether we need formal or informal. So then the neighbours, that doesn't really help us. We need to look at the purpose again. To complain about something they've done. Now, this one doesn't matter so much. I don't think you would lose points for choosing either or getting it wrong. I don't think you can really get this wrong. I personally would prefer a formal letter, or that's what I would do in the exam in this case, because I don't think it's a very friendly situation. It's more of a professional or business situation, if you want to call it that. It's not very friendly, that's for sure. However, if you did write an informal complaint to your neighbours, that's also very possible, so you wouldn't lose marks for it. I personally would do the formal one, so I'd begin with Dear Mr. and Mrs. Smith, and I would end with yours sincerely. So there you've seen 5 examples, and I hope that helps you to see when to write a formal letter and when to write an informal letter. Let's just do a quick summary of what I've said there. First, let's look at those 3 things again. Remember, look at the instructions below the task. That's definitely the most important thing. Most of the time, the instructions are going to tell you. If it's dear sir or madam, it's formal, and if it's dear, it's almost always informal. But if you're not sure, look also at the person you're writing to and the purpose of the letter. And with a bit of practice, this is much easier than maybe you think it is. One more final thing, let's look at beginnings and endings. Informal letters, you begin with Dear John, first name for example, and you end with best regards and a first name. Easy. Then there are 2 types of formal letter. Formal letter 1 is when you don't know the person's surname and you write Dear Sir, or Madam. When you write Dear Sir or Madam, you finish with yours faithfully and a full name, so with a surname as well. So I've added Jane Smith. I've given her a surname. The second type of formal letter is when you know the person's name, the surname. Dear Mr. Jones, well, you're inventing a name if it's, for example, a boss that you know. And when you have the surname that you've invented, you finish with yours sincerely, and you have a full name to finish with as well, which you can also invent. So remember those 3 ways of beginning and ending. 1 informal and 2 formal ways. Finally, remember the main thing that I've said at the beginning of this lesson. Forget the idea of semi-formal letters. Just become good at writing formal letters and become good at writing informal letters. Watch the 2 video lessons that I've made before this one, lessons 2 and 3, about formal letters and informal letters, and then you'll be well prepared. In the next lesson, next and final lesson for General Training Writing Task 1, we'll look at phrases for different purposes of letter. For example, if you're requesting, thanking, complaining, etc. So we'll look at lots of phrases for all the different purposes that you might have to write a letter for.